All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to General Government today. And I'd like to point out, I think if some of you may or may not have noticed the new artwork that's in the City Hall, and it's very lovely, and I'd like to thank John Hamrick, our council member. He's not here at the moment, but he donated this artwork to City Hall, and we're very grateful to him for it.
It's on loan.
It completely changed the whole room.
It's on loan.
It's on loan.
Yeah.
Oh, it's on
Long time loan.
Long-time loan.
Long-term loan, that's all right.
Well,
but
so long as he's council person.
it's taking us to a whole new level, I think.
Yeah. Well, when you started, I thought you were talking about the new decorationist.
Greg,
Sorry,
we're
Greg.
really happy to have you here as well.
I feel the love, actually.
Good.
We are pleased to have a full house
Yeah.
again. Today's topic is stormwater fees, and we've had several of these meetings. It's a very in-depth and complicated process, but we're happy to be able to come back and do some more education on stormwater. It is a very grave discussion, and especially when it comes to raising fees for our Canyon City residents. And we want to make sure that we do what's right and that we educate the public as much as we can about what's involved in this. With that, Tony, did you want to start out with some background information?
Yeah, just a little bit, and then we're going to start with Adam and Harry, and then our consultant, Michelle Garrett, is here too. We wish we could have renamed the stormwater fee what it actually is and what it does for the public, and that is a flooding and pollution fee. So hopefully we can continue to educate the public about that. And again, the purpose of the stormwater fee is to mitigate flooding and to meet federal and state pollution requirements as required under the Clean Water Act and within the state of Colorado. What we're going to be proposing today, after a brief overview by Adam and Harry, is a fee that's a 60% reduction over what's been presented in the past, and that reflects the direction of the council to eliminate the capital component contribution of the fee, which was $4 million over the 10-year period. So that made a substantial cost reduction, because our understanding is the interest of the council is really to create kind of an interim fee for the next couple of years until hopefully we create a regional solution to this issue in conjunction with the county, and then a different fee could be proposed at that time, depending on what the overall regional needs are, both from an operating, maintenance, and capital perspective. We also want to highlight, and Michelle is here to do this, historically, the central or the general fund allocation cost related to supporting the stormwater fee has averaged about $185,000 a year. And you have information that reflects 12 years worth of cost. And then you probably saw a spike occurring this past year. That was largely driven by our analysis by Raf Tellis, who of course did our water and stormwater fee analysis. And part of that was to look at all the cost structure. So what largely they identified was that the streets operation was underestimating the time and material they were spending on stormwater. So there was a big spike related to that. And then Michelle, through MGT Consulting, has further refined that number, which is, again, it's increased almost $200,000, and again, largely driven by streets. They represent about 58% of the cost allocation, and then about 29% is engineering. So this is not going to some luxurious overhead. This is going to nuts and bolts, maintenance, operations, and engineering. It's no more sexy than that. So we want to highlight that. And with that said, turn it over to Adam and Harry and Michelle to kind of walk you through the broader picture of the stormwater fee, and then get down into the nitty-gritty, if you want to, on the cost allocation study.
Thanks, Tony. So, yeah, essentially, we've got a few slides here to discuss, some of the requirements and reasons for some of the expenses that we have that aren't necessarily related to flooding. And I provided a memo in your packets giving some additional detail. But essentially, we've had drainage issues for a very long time, and we've had a number of different stormwater committees that were formed and discussed and came up with priorities and that sort of thing. the final catalyst for us to try to collect any money to do anything was when we were required through an unfunded mandate through the state and the federal government to look at stormwater quality. We have those non-infrastructure stormwater obligations. So this have nothing to do with capital improvements. Back in 1977, the Clean Water Act was, established. They looked at non-point discharge. So they were already looking at factories and that sort of stuff where they have, point discharge, basically a pipe flowing right into the river. They know exactly where the pollution's coming from, usually what's in it and all that sort of stuff. Well, they realized that a good part of the pollution that was entering the waterways was non-point source. So it was basically stormwater runoff all over through the communities that was entering into the streams and rivers. So they started looking at water quality and stormwater and came down with some new requirements. They first looked at the big populations, and then came phase 2, which is where they looked at the smaller communities, is where City Canyon City fits in. So we've had a permit since 2003 with those requirements to take a look at stormwater quality. What happens then is the FEMA mandates to the states to come up with a program to administer within the state. And so the state basically has their own phase 2 municipal guidance, and its water quality division is then who oversees us using those federal rules, and then also sometimes adds a layer of state rules in addition to that, and then starts drilling down in the details of what's going to actually be included in the permit. But essentially, it says the purpose of these permits is to reduce the amount of pollutants that are entering the streams. I mean, that's essentially the entire purpose of the MS4 permit. In that permit, which is under Regulation 61. Click a couple, two more. Yeah, 61 basically is the regulation that we operate under for our MS4, and it's just recently went under some changes that we have some new deadlines to be in compliance for those changes. Not huge differences, but additional requirements that we're going to have to do. But essentially that regulation states that we are required to develop and implement a stormwater management program. And then there are certain elements within that, 6 specific areas. Everything from public outreach and education to maintenance of the facilities that we have. Back again, kind of in that history, when this came down the pipe, City Council realized they had this unfounded mandate, but they also knew that a stormwater fee wasn't going to be very popular. So they purposely, I remember being part of these discussions, they purposely kept the fee at a level that was enough to comply with the MS4 permit, and then provide some capital reserve balance that could be built up and then spent as the piggy bank grew over the years. And that's pretty much how we've been operating. We would not do any capital improvements for a number of years, and then we'd have a project and we would spend down the reserves. So that's where we're at, and that was a philosophy at the time when the fee was initially established. Even though a long time before the MS4 requirements were there, we knew we had stormwater drainage quantity problems, and we knew we needed to address those. We just haven't yet been to the point where we were ready to spend the dollars as a community to take care of those problems. So I mentioned already that this final slide of mine, that's the 6 programs that we have to meet with the MS4. That's the majority of where the money goes now. That public education and outreach, public participation, the illicit discharge detection and elimination, that's us out looking for pollution, answering calls and complaints about pollution. The construction stormwater management side of things, that's when there's a new project that's happening. We, example of that, when you see silt fence around a new construction project, those are those kind of requirements. We're required to go out and inspect those. We process stormwater permits for those kind of sites and so forth. Then there's post-construction. Post-construction is when we do some detention or a permanent water quality feature. We go out and inspect every single one of those every year, send the owner of those management BMPs. It may be a private one, it may be public, it may be different departments within the city. We send them notices and then follow up to make sure that they're maintaining those properly. And then, as I mentioned, our own housekeeping. We have to follow the rules ourselves. So what are we doing with our own facilities, our own processes to make sure that we're keeping the water clean? I think that's it. I think that's me in a nutshell. If you don't have any questions for me as far as the history, the MS4 permitting requirements, then I'll turn it over to Michelle Garrett with MGT, who's going to talk about the cost allocation calculations. And, no, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
So, just remind you that we hired Raftellus to do the stormwater rate increase analysis. And out of their analysis, they looked at our allocation and said, we need to do something there because it's not quite right. So then, out of that, we hired Michelle and her group. And so now she's here today to show us the results of that. And then Harry will follow up after that discussion with what our suggestions are.
Okay, does anyone have questions for Adam now before we get into the other topics?
Yes.
Yes, John?
This is just, I think I know what the answer is, and it's just for the record. But the illicit discharge detection and elimination, that's not restricted to stormwater. That's for all categories of discharge, including the more traditional into the pipe and things like that. And so that's a broader thing than just stormwater or MS4 type things.
Well, with the intent of, we're assuming that if there is a discharge of any hazardous material within our jurisdiction, it's going to somehow end up in the river. Right. And whether it's raining or not at that time. So yes, other than there are some facilities that have their own point discharge industrial permits, and then the state administers those, we don't.
Correct.
Yeah,
But we have to look for the illicit ones.
that's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question? And what I thought about for some time is what constitutes a storm? It rains here. Because this is going to drill back to how much is reimbursed from other departments, like the street department, the street cleaner and stuff like that. Is that fair to ask what is considered a storm? Because a normal rain, that's not really a storm, or is it?
Well, we call it all stormwater, but essentially if it falls out of the of the air, I mean, the groundwater's impacted. I mean, any naturally occurring water source is going to be considered under this umbrella, so to speak. No pun intended. But it's not just that. It could be illicit discharge, as John just mentioned, with no storm event at all. Someone, one that we've had before is a power washing, or someone doing some carpet cleaning and draining their wash water out into the street and it draining down into the river. So when we're looking at those things, it could be a dry day discharge as well.
So a broken water main.
Right, broken water as well. We have to manage those as well in the same sense. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, Jim?
I don't know that I've ever asked this, or maybe you've told us this, but let's just say, for example, that we got really bold or really stupid and said, we're not going to comply with MS4. What actually happens then with the federal government? What do they do? Come in and take Doug away from us, or what do they do?
No, they actually do similar to what they did with Colorado Springs, and they come in and sue you and then start fining you. I mean, the minimum fines are like 10 grand a day for each violation. So it depends on how many violations you have. It stacks up pretty fast.
Okay. So there is financial repercussions for,
Right, and then, and then they could do like a consent decree, so basically every bit of your fines goes towards doing what you were supposed to be doing anyway. So regardless, you're going to be made to spend the money.
So even though there would be no capital expenditures in this particular proposal, it's because we're doing something, we're probably going to get out of having that effect that the federal government would come after us. even though
Sure,
it
I mean,
won't cure
they
it.
do audits all the time, and nobody's perfect. I mean, any audit, they're probably going to find something.
Okay.
We haven't been audited, but they do audits often, and it seems like those are becoming more common. And, there's always a chance that there's something wrong in the program. But, yeah, the quickest way to get an audit is to
To do nothing.
do nothing or get the word out that we're not going to do this or this or this.
Okay, okay.
But, go ahead, John.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and one other thing on that, as I understand it, and correct me if your understanding is different than mine, but as I understand it, the federal government, the state, don't give a hang about if we have water that impacts, that causes damage to people's property. They only care about the quality of our discharge and whether we're complying with our permit. We don't have really any quality standards except best management practices in our permit. But the federal government doesn't care whether we have property damage going on from storm events. And so that's part of our challenge in thinking about this is understanding those differences, because it makes a difference in how we identify what the problems are and what the solutions can be to those problems.
Yeah,
Well-
there is a small component in there under the good housekeeping that we are to maintain our facilities. For them, they realize that if, even if you had a capacity type facility that failed, it could then have some subsequent quality problems as well. So there is a little bit in there, but you're absolutely right. It's all, under this program, under this permit, it's all about water quality.
So, and that's something I think that we need to keep in mind during this conversation, is that is two-pronged. We have the MS4 permit from the federal government, which comes with financial repercussions if we don't follow the Clean Water Act. On the other hand, we have capital improvements that need to be made to prevent flooding and getting it to our regular citizens and also into the ditches, which can also have financial repercussions because we can be facing lawsuits if we don't mitigate some of those problems. And so as we go forward with this conversation, I want to make sure that we're sensitive to the fact that if we're only going to be funding enough for MS4 permit regulations to be with that we could also be neglecting the other side of where we have projects that need to be taken care of and done to prevent flooding to our citizens.
And I guess on that note, that may be one of the things we want to finish today. I don't want to get into the discussion now because we're moving on to talk about finance and stuff. But I guess I would like to hear a confirmation today that you want us to continue down the path of the district formation, because the Stormwater Task Force believes that is the answer to what you just stated.
Right, so the Stormwater Task Force, I think we are making progress with that. We have been meeting with the county, but it is going to take a lot of discussion from our citizens to want that our commissioners will be on board with it, as well as the voters themselves. I think we have a lot of folks in the audience today that I was able to visit with before the meeting started, wanting to understand and learn more about the stormwater problem, because it is complicated and concerning and expensive, and that this is going to take education to everybody.
And you'll see later in the numbers that Harry presents, we did build some money in there to help out with that district formation as it moves forward.
Okay. Along those lines, I do have, because I had the question, what if we, in the last stormwater meeting we had, some folks had just ignored the MS4 permit, just spend all the, we just wanted all that money spent for capital improvement. We've established that can't be done without facing serious financial repercussions from the federal government. But I would like to know if, when that utility was formed in the first place, was it funded adequately for the job that needed to be done at that time?
No, as I explained earlier,
Right.
they knew that would be a very unpopular, hard thing to do at the time. A comparison at the time, when they were looking at forming the utility, and they were comparing it to other utilities, our rate was a third to a fourth of what other utilities across the state were as far as the monthly fee. And they just knew that they couldn't do the $15 or $20 a month like the city of Fort Collins does to be able to provide that capital funding. And so, similar to what we had brought to you previously with this 100% increase was, let's get back to balancing the budget and collecting a little bit of capital, and we'll bank it. And then as we have some, we'll do little projects. That was the thinking at the time.
Okay, and since then there were it looked like some small increases to the stormwater fund. I would like to know how that compares, the inflation, cost of inflation during that time since it was instituted to the revenue that's been brought in.
Yeah, I mean, I typically use, for estimating purposes, I don't know if Jim has some numbers, but I typically use about 5%.
I asked
a
Harry
year,
for that.
yeah.
Basically, what I'd asked Harry for was, assuming that we had a cost of living increase from the last increase, what would the rate be today? And the rate that Harry's given me, if you want to write this down, is .026511,
I think that was 22% increase.
which is right, basically 21.39, but Tony rounds up
Yeah.
all the time. I'm coming up with a little different rate, but it's essentially the same, that it's, because I'm not seeing where Harry and I are using the same base rate, and I can't imagine Harry being wrong, but I don't see that he used the
I'm
points.
assuming Harry used Denver CPI?
Well, he used the cost of
We use
living,
Denver
Yes,
Border
CPI.
CPI.
but it doesn't look, I don't know how he got to the 2009 rate based upon the 2008 rate, but the concept is
Yeah.
the same, is that you're in that range of .026 or .0026 or .0022, depending on which figure you use, in terms of where the rate would be at today. And I don't know how he multiplies that out, but that's what the rate would be today had it been adjusted annually only based upon the inflationary rate.
And John can correct me, John, we use the demographic information from state of Colorado, right? To calculate the,
We gathered data
we-
from Colorado Legislative Council and their economic forecast and records that they keep.
For the annual increases.
You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
So what?
Did you include 2006 with that?
Well, I took the rate from 2008, which was the last rate of increase of .001821,
Yeah.
and then, but Harry's beginning rate is .0021, which should have been slightly less than the 8. So there's just some pennies, I'm going to call it pennies differences,
Yeah.
but the concept's the same, is that if we would have increased based upon inflationary rates, we would be in that range of .022 or 26 today. And I don't know what kind of revenue that would generate, because I don't know what the multiplier then is, but
I guess that's my question. What would the monthly bill look like if we had kept up with the inflation?
Well, roughly 22% more, but that wouldn't include capital investments. That's just operations.
Right, and remember, the original numbers didn't also necessarily have a proper allocation.
Yeah.
That's true.
so, in answer to that, I'm thinking, without taking Harry's
Thunder.
bubble away, whatever it is,
Thunder.
thunder. You know, that rate of being inflationary adjusted is very, very close to the rate that they're proposing, just based on inflationary. And again, like Adam said, it doesn't include essentially any capital. We're still where we were at 10 years ago. We're
So
funding
so the key
operation.
to capital is the stormwater utility,
Yeah.
which is going to be a long process to get to that level.
I think, did you have something?
I was going to ask Adam, since a lot of this information is new to me. Does the federal government on the the MS4 permits, do they specifically target like city municipalities, or how does it?
It's based on population density.
Okay, so, but what about like county entities or things like that?
Again, it's
You're large
population
enough.
density, so there are some counties that have MS4 permits.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But they don't overlap, right? Typically?
Typically, but sometimes they do, and then they have shared agreements and so forth, that sort of thing.
Because we have one, the county doesn't have one. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's the point for us. Our county does not qualify on the population density as needing a permit, so they're not required to have one.
Well, I don't know if you can say they don't qualify, they just hasn't been-
Yeah, it's a sensitive issue.
Does Fla-
There are
does-
areas that
Sure.
probably meet the density, and they can permit areas within a jurisdiction, but,
Okay.
Does-
So it's based on population, not the definition of the,
correct.
That's somewhere in.
Yeah.
Does Florence, excuse me, does Florence have one?
No,
No, too small.
So they do nothing, they do nothing for stormwater?
yeah, they're way too small, yeah. Well, I don't know if they do nothing for stormwater, but they don't have an MS4 permit.
Doesn't rain in Florence, huh?
It doesn't rain over there.
And it's important to note, the rules of the Clean Water Act apply to everyone.
Right.
The difference is the permitted entities have specific programs that they have to implement, and then they are being watched a little closer. But everybody has to follow the rules.
So where are the outlets from the stormwater typically? Are they just dispersed along the Arkansas?
They're all over the place, some of them into the ditch. That's one of the big issues we have is
You should
we're
come join one
draining
of our
to all number of
I
places.
should, just to get brought up to speed, to be
The
honest.
two state waters within our jurisdiction is 4 Mile Creek and the Arkansas River.
Yeah, so we should, anyone's invited from the council to attend the Stormwater Task Force meeting, and it is very educational. You can learn quite a bit about the problem.
But bring your calculator.
Do-
And your engineers.
When is the next one?
29th,
29th?
March 29th.
March 29th,
3:30.
3:30. And those are because of my schedule, folks. Thanks. I do have just a comment that it's my understanding that the situation with the city of Colorado Springs and the EPA was actually started by the Southeastern Water District in terms of their contamination issues with the Fountain Creek. That
Well-
went on for years.
Well, again, I think that's what got their attention.
Right.
Even though they actually ended up working a deal with the city of Pueblo, by that time they had gotten the state.
They
and-
riled the
and
bees.
federal-
Yes, yeah.
So the point is, we have a similar situation here that with our ditch companies and the discharge of stormwater into our ditch companies. And we've quieted that beehive right now with some smoke with the ditch companies until we get this first study done to identify the discharge of stormwater into those ditches. Once we've completed that, that beehive is going to start getting active again because the ditch companies, I guarantee you, are going to want some kind of physical action done relative to the discharge of water in those ditches.
Sure.
Under this plan, which is apparently what the citizens want, we have absolutely no recourse to do anything this year relative to capital with that discharge.
And that's what I wanted to clarify, that the gravity of this is that those dish companies want projects done, and they don't want to wait 10 years to see anything happen. They
Yeah.
probably don't even want to wait 2 years to see anything
Yeah.
happen.
And that's what resulted in Colorado Springs being sued by actually Pueblo County, and the net result was a consent decree in which they were obligated to pay $460 million in capital improvements over the next 20 years.
Right.
And it also resulted in them going back and adopting a stormwater fee for Colorado Springs to pay for that.
So are we ready to go to the next subject? Okay, we're ready.
All right, hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Garrett. I'm with MGT Consulting Group. And just a little overview of our company. I'm a previous accountant, so I'm a numbers nerd person.
Excuse me, Michelle, can you talk into the microphone a little bit more directly?
Is it?
There we go. Sure. And I have been working on cost allocation plans for cities and counties here in Colorado. I also do some in California and Oklahoma and some other states. But cost allocation is what I've been doing for the last 10 years, pretty much every day. And our company, Eric and I, are here in Colorado, and we do cost allocation plans for many, many cities and counties. Currently, right now, I'm working with the city of Boulder, the city of Loveland, and the city of Westminster, as well as you guys. So those are just the cities I'm working on. However, we also work with many counties. They do cost allocation for some different reasons. But we work with Fremont County, but I work with Denver County, Jefferson County, Summit County, Eagle County, Pitkin County. I could go on and on, Otero or Ray. So this is what we do every day, all day long. Just as an overview. So today I'd like to provide an overview of what a cost allocation plan is and discuss various applications of the cost plan, although I think you guys have your application right here, right now, and present just what the timeline was that we went through, and then again, the results of the cost allocation plan. So first off, a cost allocation plan is an accounting document that identifies citywide indirect costs and distributes those costs to benefiting departments. So first off, indirect costs are in those departments in the city that provide services to other city departments. So they're more inward facing. That's going to be your finance people, your IT people, HR. Those are your common ones, but also your streets people in addition. The receiving departments, as I call them, the stormwater, PD, fire, all those, are more outward facing. So their clients are essentially the public. So what we do is we identify who those central service departments are, kind of figure out what they do, how they do it, and who they do it for, to see who their clients are, and then what's the best way of allocating their costs to their clients based on the function that they perform. Applications of a cost allocation plan. I'll go over this, very quickly, because you're using it here for your stormwater rates. That's your application. However, there's other different types of applications you can use it for. Essentially, it gives you what the full cost of your receiving department is to do their business for their clients or constituents. The process, we came down, I met with Harry and John, and we kind of went over the kind of what they do, how they do it, and who they do it for. And then I met with IT, and I met with, I talked with Kathy, and pretty much every central service department, and asked them those questions so I could figure out what each department does. Like I said, I do this for many different cities and counties, and I just had the question today, well, then you could compare them. And the answer is no, because what Kathy does here is completely different than what the Jefferson County clerk does or what the Summit County clerk does. Not entirely different. There's a lot of statutory requirements, but she does a lot more than perhaps what the clerk does in Summit County. So although there's similarities between what each of the departments does, there's quite a few differences too. So we kind of figure out what that is. We collect a lot of data. Thank you, John. Excellent help there. And once I get that data, I put it into, we have proprietary software that we utilize using a double step-down method and everything to process the results. Then we gave it to Harry and John and others to look at, for them to look at what their allocations look like and review it and kind of get back to me, and then changes happen and we do another draft and more changes happen, and we kind of go through that till we're at what we have today. This is just a listing of those central service departments that were here and identified at Canyon City. So you have engineering, equipment repair, your facilities, your IT departments, HR, city admin, city clerk. Any questions? If you have questions, please, you may ask them whenever you'd like.
I do.
Councilman Meisner has a
I
question.
don't know if it's appropriate at this stage, but if you go back, yeah. Did you interview personnel from each one of those departments?
I do not believe I interviewed anybody here at City Council, but depreciation isn't obviously a department. John took care of that, but yes, I think so. General fund insurance is also not a department.
But essentially, those interviews were to try to help determine from those staff where their times were being spent. Is that correct?
Yes, what functions they perform, what tasks are involved in those functions, and then who the clientele are, and what kind of statistical methods they keep in their departments for allocations, and where they spend their time. Yes.
And if you're going to answer this later, then I'll stop. But I assume in that process, I'm confused as to how you would determine the number of hours that the street sweeper, just as an example, spent on stormwater.
Okay, and yeah, I can get into more
Okay.
detail later on, yeah. Just as a high overview, the cost plan results. Now, I put in here what John and Harry had come up with as a comparison. John was doing a sophisticated model, but we came up with a little bit different in for both water and stormwater. There's something I think I should mention, however. The cost allocation plan is regulated by the Office of Management and Budget. And in particular, 2 CFR Part 200, that circular provides the rules and regulations essentially over cost allocation plans. And one of their rules is, for instance, here, your application is for water and stormwater. Other places, it's for human services. I get the question, well, can I just tell you what I did for water or what I did for human services? Why do I have to tell you how I spent all of my time? And the answer to that is under OMB, the circular 2 CFR, we're required to do a cost allocation plan and allocate the central service department's time and effort to all of their clients, not just water and stormwater. And then you or whoever gets a cost allocation plan can take what numbers you're looking for out of that. So when I do a cost allocation plan, it's to all of the city departments, not just water and stormwater. So even though I'm presenting only those 2 numbers, I could present to you the costs that were allocated to the clerk's office. I could allocate or tell you for any department within the city what their cost allocations were.
Like council.
What's that?
Like council.
Correct. Yes, I could tell you what your citywide overhead is. Yes.
And are you injecting those figures in the new budget? I'm off subject, but kind of
I
not.
mean, we'll certainly factor them into the 2019 budget, but for this purposes,
Right.
we're using this data just for the stormwater fee.
Right, but we'll use that study to,
And it also,
Yes, it
more
can be used for
importantly, it
that.
will help Harry and John recalibrate their
Right.
analysis so that we don't have to always hire someone. They'll just recalibrate how they allocate costs so we can be more true to that distribution.
So these are just for water and stormwater. Like I said, there's others. And you can see our results were a little bit different than what John and Harry came up with. And then I just kind of expanded on these results, and you can see, it's kind of small, but you can see how, from each central service department, how much was allocated. Yes, sorry.
So, yeah, my question is, per Canyon City, per management, which ones are your numbers?
Oh, I'm sorry. I would be MGT.
Oh, MGT, it's
Yeah.
not management, but MGT, thank you.
So
Now
I
I'm-
have a question. Where did you find the differences between what the city was kind of
Okay.
estimating versus yours?
So here is the results by central service department. Oh, you have copies up there, okay. So you can see the differences. Some of them, my results were less, and some were more than what John and Harry had come up with, and it depends on the central service department.
But to Ashley's question, the 2 major areas are streets and engineering. If you want to look at the major variances between how we had done it historically and what MGT discovered to be discrepancies, those are the 2 major areas, streets and engineering.
Yeah, you can see the street difference is 171,000. And that's what the total difference is, 172. So there where the difference is. Everything else wash out in one department to other departments.
Yes.
Okay, so we had an agreement of, never mind.
All right, let's go on.
So from here, what I can do is kind of, what I'd like to do, and I think this will get to some of the questions you had. Oh, it's not up there. Sorry, I just changed to Excel. I don't know. You want me to pull this out?
Have to allocate more time in city council. So we have to allocate more time for city council because then we'll take it off their fee.
This is Tony's fault.
Hey, Tony, while they're working on that, can I ask a question?
Sure.
That's been asked and kind of talked about, is that the general fund has been all this money has been from the street department or the engineering department has been spending time on stormwater, but not billing the stormwater utility fee for their work. Why is that a problem? I know what the answer is, but can you please expound on that for the record?
Well, there's, one of the issues is the stormwater cost, there should be a relationship between the cost and the charge. In this case, it results in a fee. If it's part of the general fund, you're looking at general taxes like sales taxes and property taxes, and you can distribute them as you wish. There doesn't have to be a relationship or nexus between the revenue and the expense. But for stormwater, for example, and water, there needs to be a direct relationship. Otherwise, it's a tax, and if it's a tax, the public has to vote on it. So in this case, if there wasn't a direct relationship between the cost of service and the fee, and it was really a tax, then the public, not you, would have to vote on this. There's the major difference. And also the spike in the last 2 years, first, Ratellis discovered it, and then MGT has verified that, is really related largely to the streets department, unbeknownst to them, was really underestimating their time. Like if there was debris across a street, they'd clean it up, but that debris was the result of stormwater. It just didn't come out of the heavens. So they were just routinely maintaining our streets and not accounting for that. And when we zeroed down on these kind of operational issues, that's why this number has changed, is because they began to recognize, yeah, that wasn't just general street maintenance, that really was related to stormwater. So that's why we get the better accounting.
Miss Ashley, the other point that we need to recognize is that there was a contingent here at our last stormwater meeting that questioned, and I am one of those people too that have always questioned the process.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were to create a separate stormwater district,
Yeah.
then at some point, that district is going to have to start staffing it to accomplish the things that that district needs to accomplish.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all of those labor costs for attorneys, administration, tractors, backhoes, becomes an issue, and there's no background.
Mm-hmm.
And this is verifying to people that there are true physical costs associated with the stormwater, but the way we're set up, we have to transfer those expenses.
Yeah.
And some people buy that theory and some people don't, but this helps with a second independent study
Mhm.
to say, these are the figures, and by the way, what you've been doing isn't right, it's way low.
Yeah.
And I think the general assumption, and I'm included, is that they were way high,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's coming back with 2 studies showing us that it's low.
Yeah. In the more likely scenarios, they won't hire people because they won't be big enough. There's no economy of scale. They'll be contracting the city.
Right.
And the city has to be absolutely diligent to make sure that we're recovering the true cost of providing those services. So that's, again, another important reason why these studies help validate what the true cost to provide services are and why we need to pay attention to them.
I mean,
Otherwise, we're subsidizing other entities at our expense.
So each utility must be 100% independent
Yes,
in
they're a
their
going
revenues
concern.
and expenses.
to give you an example, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, but just look at the sanitation district. That's a separate entity with its own staff, own legal staff, accounting, equipment, that has to be self-sufficient. And if we move into a stormwater separate district, that district's going to have to operate the same way.
Mhm.
It's going to have to fund itself, whether they contract or not, but
Just to echo what Jim just said, instead of using the city staff to do the same work, you have to hire outside services. When you do that, that amount of the expenditures what you made, that will show as an operating expense. Right now, it's showing as a transfer between, but the end result is same. My opinion, the other way around, that expense would be a lot more than what we are spending through the city operation. So indirectly, the stormwater fund is benefiting by using the city staff doing the work.
Okay, so let's continue, Michelle, thank you.
Sorry, and I apologize, this isn't the best presentation via this, but I think, do they have a cost
Yeah,
allocation
they
plan?
do.
Okay, all right. So
You
just,
have the fat.
just to kind of go over the different allocation bases that are utilized for each of those central service departments. They're pretty standard. Like I said, I do this all the time. And these are allocation bases that we utilize in many cities and counties. Building and equipment depreciation, we don't allocate capital, but we do, because we do allocate depreciation. That is, again, part of the 2 CFR Part 200. So instead of taking a huge capital expenditure in 1 year, we don't do that. We take the depreciation that is spread over several years, whatever the depreciation schedule is. So that's for building and equipment depreciation. City council, your costs were spread to every single department within the city based on their representative size of operating expenditures to total operating expenditures of the city. City clerk, there is part of that job position that is directly to the public, outward facing. That does not get allocated. Only the inward facing tasks are allocated, and they're allocated based on operating expenditures also. Human resources allocated based on FTEs across the city. Again, it's always going to be based on the size of each department to the total size of the city. Computer resources, number of devices, buildings. There's facilities provide services directly to certain water buildings, so the costs are put into the costs of the salaries and service and supplies related to the person that provides services to the water buildings is in that water bucket, and then it gets allocated directly to water. Same with streets, and there is a person there that also does risk claims as a portion of their job, so that portion of time spent on that task is allocated based on number of claims by department. And then for all water streets, for all the buildings that they kind of go back and forth between, that's based on square footage of all those buildings. And it's adjusted for large spaces that are not maintained. You have a big warehouse space. Facilities doesn't maintain that warehouse space, but they may do the little office in the warehouse. So that adjustment is made. Finance, there's several functions here. Use supervision is based on FTEs of department supervised. Accounting is based on operating expenditures. The accounts payable function is based on both dollar value and number of P-card transactions. Payroll is based on FTEs plus any and all personnel changes that occurred throughout the year that they have to do something with. Cashiering based on number of receipts, and sale tax based on operating expenditures in the general fund only. Non-departmental is a lot of different little costs, and each of those costs were separated and allocated differently based on what that cost related to, whether it was insurance or there was a lot of insurance in there, some claims stuff. And then the city attorney is paid out of non-departmental too, and they provide a timesheet essentially. So that's utilized in that allocation.
So can you go into more detail about the cost allocations from into the stormwater utility?
So, like I said, each of these is going to be allocated to stormwater if they are provided that service. So let me show you. Let me bring up a different report to show you a little bit better. And it's not this one.
Can Can you do the vehicle or the equipment repair one?
Yeah.
The equipment repair?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a good example that we got. We probably have, I don't know, 100 vehicles within the city,
Okay.
but not all of those, I would assume, are going to get allocated to stormwater.
Right, so if we take, just run you through equipment repair, sure. So, equipment repair has their expenditures, actual expenditures, or actually, these are budget year 18 expenditures, I think, yes. So we take those expenditures, we take their citywide overhead, so the costs that get allocated to fleet or equipment repair. And then it is based on, the allocation base is vehicle and equipment costs by department. So these are the equipment costs by department, and this is their relative percentages as a percentage of total, so then you can see how much of the fleet's costs, budget year 18 costs, are allocated to each of the departments. So.
So is that telling me that the street department had 108,000?
Actually, 115.
But that included all of the vehicles in the fleet department, in the street department, is that correct?
Yes.
But were all of those vehicles utilized for storm water?
No. So
Well, then-
stormwater was only allocated, they're down here. So they were only allocated $4,285 from fleet.
Only 1.8%.
Yeah. So they didn't receive, let me show you, here's a,
If I could, maybe, and maybe this is my misunderstanding, so maybe you can help me understand better, but we're talking indirect costs, we're not talking direct costs, right?
Indirect cost.
These are
Correct.
indirect costs.
Correct.
And so there are not, so when you send the street sweeper out to sweep up the street after a stormwater event, that's a direct cost.
no, I believe the street sweeper is in streets, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
if we look at that,
About 50%.
yeah, so if we look at that, let me go back up here, I'm sorry.
But she's showing, Jim, she's showing the allocations from equipment repair to each department.
Yeah,
So when it showed streets, that's how much equipment repair was allocating to the street department.
yes. That's how much equipment repair supports the streets department.
But then don't you turn around and take the street department expenses and reallocate that back to stormwater?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, it's called the double step-down methodology.
It seems like double charging.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
It
but
is-
you're already charging stormwater once. What is it, what equipment does stormwater have? They don't have anything.
Yeah, they have.
They
use
had
a
very
vehicle.
little.
They
They
use a
did have
vehicle.
very little.
Glenda uses, for example, a vehicle, so that would be reflected at $4,000.
For one vehicle?
Yeah,
we
oil,
have-
gas,
yeah, we
over
have-
the course
we
of the
have,
year,
um,
insurance.
We have
Sure,
one
easily.
Jeep and the vac truck,
Yeah.
are the only two vehicles
Yeah.
Okay,
that the stormwater has.
that are specific stormwater.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, I might buy that.
Okay.
I mean, not your statement, but the concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. So streets here, we took the streets budget and broke it up between the asphalt crew, the concrete crew, the street sweeper, and the sign technician. So the street sweeper, 50% went to stormwater plus 5% activity. So they're not getting 100% of the street sweeper's costs. They're only getting 50% of it, plus a little bit more if there's like a lot of storms, which there weren't in fiscal year 17, which is what my cost allocation plan is based on, is fiscal year 17 activity specific to that year.
So relative to that specific subject, Adam can maybe help me, is this morning I seen the sweet sweeper out at 5:30 when I went to work. Why was he sweeping the street?
Because debris collects on the streets, and that same debris is what enters the storm sewer.
Yeah,
So this morning when I seen the street sweeper out,
yeah.
in theory, was he doing stormwater work or street work?
Both.
Both.
So.
And air
so the-
pollution
So the
reduction.
function he's doing right at that moment is multifunction. So we
Because
have
of
to
the, because of
allocate,
the MS4.
right, so not every, he doesn't go, oh, I'm driving today for a
Right.
storm, today I'm driving for the streets. Every day it's for the streets and a storm, and storm water, even though it's not raining. Because he's picking up the debris before it does rain, is the idea.
So how did you come up with the 50? Who did that?
That was based on a discussion with the street department, and I think that they, and I don't know if they roughly based it on how many storm, what do you call them things? The,
Right, and part of that's gonna be left to intuition on our part. It's just going to be, because it's, who gets to decide how much of the benefit is, I mean, you know,
We talked to several sources, and they cooperated each other,
yeah,
and we use a conservative level.
yeah. I mean, we bought the street sweepers for dust mitigation initially.
Yeah,
It was for airborne pollution, not stormwater. So we know there's a component of that, that's general fund.
So Michelle interviewed the individual employee, and then individually, separately to the supervisor, and then she talked to the department heads, and then see whether how much information is common, and that's what she's using.
and one of the questions I ask, and I ask this a lot with all the cost allocation plans I do, is if streets didn't have a street sweeper, would stormwater have to essentially have one? And the answer I heard was yes, they would definitely have to have one. And so right there, there's, you know that you're going to have to allocate that cost.
And that's because of best practices.
Right, so you're reducing the loading, the burden within the inlets and the pipes. So you catch it in the street or you clean it out of the pipes. Yep.
So in
Are there-
reality, instead of having 100% of the cost related to stormwater, it's split between stormwater and the general fund.
Are there any other questions from council members?
Great.
The cost allocation plan can get very detailed, so if you have more specific questions to dig down about the double step-down method or anything like that, I can answer those.
I think my understanding or questions stem from the fact that the average person doesn't, including myself, doesn't necessarily grasp that street sweeper being out there doing a stormwater function on July 7th when it's 100 degrees. And
Except for it rains almost every afternoon of July.
Well,
And that's part of the problem, is they only relate the stormwater issue to
the
when it's
rain.
raining.
Yeah.
And that's not how the stormwater quality issue works.
Well, at the beginning of the meeting, Tony had said, what was it? Essentially what stormwater is
It's a pollution and flood
flooding. Yeah.
purposes. So if
I mean,
you want to
underst-
eliminate pollution, you have to eliminate the debris before it lands up in the Arkansas River.
I mean, understanding that more, I question if 50% is correct and not some higher percentage. If we could in fact function without street sweepers, no, there is an
Well,
inconvenience.
that's Harry's point to the economics, of the city doing it, the general fund doing it versus a stormwater independent enterprise would have to have their own sweeper.
Yeah.
And then the city
Yeah.
might still have to have their sweeper so
Yeah.
that they can sweep the street
Yeah.
before Blossom Weekend, or they might have to hire the stormwater utility district to do
Yeah.
it for them. I
Yeah.
mean, it's,
Right.
yeah.
Economies of scale.
Are there any other questions for Michelle at this time?
Thanks, Michelle.
Harry and John, do you have any comments that you would like to make concerning the last stormwater meeting where there were a lot of questions about stormwater fees and allocations and how the money is spent? There was some
Only
misconceptions.
the comment I can make is, last 15 years, John is preparing this cost allocation, and I'm reviewing. And what methodology, what we use is exactly the same what she's explaining. And when we were talking about her methods, I asked her a straight question, and she can witness that by looking at our records and what they are performing, what's the difference, or you are doing this work for other cities. When you compare to our work, what we presented to you, to compare to the other cities, what do you think? And her answer, you can give the answer.
I am greatly impressed. You better watch out. We might hire John over there. His was the most sophisticated and the best I've seen. And we go in and quite often see counties and cities that do it by hand, and his was by far the best I've ever seen.
Oh,
So
Michelle,
what-
you can't have them.
We are actually looking for somebody.
There you go.
So what I'm trying to tell you, the numbers what we are using over the years is very conservative. You know, we were not aware of the situation last year when city decided to hire an independent consultant for water and stormwater rates. At that time, we had a group meetings, and engineers start talking about how the stormwater works. At that time, we figured out, oh, there are some additional expenditures we are not accounting for because we are not aware of. So now, John said, what should you do? And I said, since I am making aware of by engineer and the group meeting, my duty, my professional duty is to include that in the next allocation. And when we did that, that becomes 300,000 becomes 600,000. That's what the difference is.
And that's how we got Michelle, because.
And
out
going
of-
forward, since we know that this is happening, we have to use that number.
Jim?
Just for public record, how long have you been doing the cost allocation within the city?
Ever since it started, 18 years,
And in each of those 18 years, was that cost allocation approved by the city council,
correct, every year,
including
and never been questioned,
including any council members that were present 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
correct.
Thank you.
Correct. And also, let me add one more thing. In 2017, when we discovered the difference, we asked you to do the supplemental appropriation. And city council approved, by everybody's voted yes, for $256,000 in addition. In 2018 budget, we added 620,000 and the budget was approved. So there wasn't any question from you guys until the citizen had a concerns. And we need to revisit this and make sure that everybody understand what these numbers are. And that's the reason we hired independent consultant to confirm what our methodology is not a wrong methodology.
And I'll get off my soapbox, but I just want to reiterate that the implication from 2 weeks ago or whenever it was, by previous council, and I hate to name people, was that all of a sudden, we've arbitrarily put these false figures to justify the stormwater rates. And if you look at public record, that is not the case. That in fact, those particular people approved those stormwater transfers.
That is correct.
Thank you.
And has been verified by 2 independent studies now. Where do you want to go from here, guys?
We see,
Oh, I got a
Okay.
silly question. What part of this was allocated with regards, because it has to do with stormwater, under whose budget?
Excuse me?
The study.
It was water and stormwater is paying for that
Okay,
analysis.
but I mean, but was it allocated like all the other stuff?
Yes.
A little here, a little?
Yeah, it was in the budget. Yeah.
Okay, don't kill no more trees.
Yeah.
mass murderers.
Could I ask a question? I know that, I understand the Tabor thing and the taxing and everything. What if we didn't have a stormwater district and it was all funded through just the city?
And that's not uncommon.
I
Just
know.
right up the road, Salida does that.
Right.
As you well know, stormwater fees are highly controversial and unpopular. And that's why cities bury them in their general funds, so they don't have to deal with the issue. The problem is that in this community, we have a very low revenue basis to start with. We have probably the lowest property tax per capita in the state, so it's not like you can turn to the property tax. Your sales tax We just had an increase for the first time in what, probably 20, 30 years, and it took 4 efforts to accomplish that, and that was for roads, which is a use that everyone appreciates and enjoys, unlike stormwater. So you'd have a very, very difficult time, I think, getting support for general tax for the cost of the stormwater. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any tax, and we'd have to carve out, you know, roughly 1.2, 1.3 million from the general fund. So just identify what services you want reduced to offset this cost, because that's what we had to do. And that's exactly what Colorado Springs was doing for several years. They were carving $20 million out of their general fund every year, predominantly out of the police budget, the fire budget. The community was upset with that. The mayor finally took it upon himself to say, enough is enough. We need to go to the public and get them to pay directly for this service, and it passed in November, and that's why they have the new fee imposed upon them for stormwater, because it was crippling the other key functions of the city.
And that would be going backwards. That's archaic. That's
Right. No,
part of what's changed with stormwater in the last 30 years is this recognition, especially with the water quality issues, that this is a service that's being provided to the citizens. This is not like your standard, you know, other general fund functions. And this is how it's being done now, not just nationally, but internationally.
Yeah, well, I'm voicing what citizens have said, so I wanted that sort of, I knew the answer,
It's a
but that needed to be.
Legitimate concern.
And the other question is, well, Colorado Springs is only charging $5 a month, period,
Yeah.
but they got 1 million people there.
Well, they have 180,000 households,
Right.
which that number, $5, equates to exactly what the consent decree requires them to pay every year. They backed into that number. It generates $20 million.
Yeah, they're doing the same thing. They're not necessarily raising what they need. They're just
Yeah.
raising what they have
The
to.
court
What they have.
requires them to
Right.
pay.
So,
And I knew that, I just wanted
Yeah.
it to be
Yeah,
a public
yeah.
record.
so under that, that note, right now we're at the 60% increase, just to cover what we need.
Well, 40%
40%
increase, yeah.
increase for
Yeah,
just what we
yes.
need.
Yeah.
If we were to charge to be able to cover for everything, for MS4 permitting, and to cover all of our capital improvement costs, we'd actually have to increase our stormwater fee by 1,000%.
Harry actually has that slide.
Is that correct, Harry?
Yeah, Harry can cover that. He's prepared to.
So we're really looking at a necessity for a 1,000% increase, which obviously is absolutely impossible. A 100% increase has been very upsetting for our folks. I'm a little worried that a 40% actually won't be able to be enough.
Michelle, thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you so
Thank you.
much,
Thank you.
Michelle. We really appreciate that
Thank you.
work.
And just one other, while Harry's looking that up, one other point on the issue of funding it through general taxes, what that does, that, like you say, it buries the issue. The other way to say it, it hides the issue, and it obscures really the county, responsibility in this whole thing, because it's not the water doesn't just fall on Canyon City. So if it's hidden in taxes for the people, there's no discussion with the county about what their share is.
Well, clarification, that is also, it would just, I think, would just be utility based on the drainage basins that are affecting our town, not people in Howard or Coaldale or anything like that.
Right.
So we need to clarify that to the people, that although we would like that to happen, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, this would be more of a regional.
Regional,
Regional,
for those
not
basins that
county.
are flooding into our town. Right, okay.
Have any calculations been done if the stormwater utility were to happen? I mean, because that's a big if. If it could actually pass and come into fruition, if it was charged the same rate as we're going to have with a 40% increase, how much more money would that generate?
We haven't done that. We're starting that process, and we'll be discussing that more on the 29th. But that's in the formation of the district, that's what we're talking about, is providing that kind of data, and we're starting to work on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Jim, do you have
I still
another
have
comment?
questions. Adam, in the new software that you're buying,
Yes.
whatever it's called, but John had indicated that software's got the ability to give us very specific cost allocation.
That's what we're working on. So it will have, right now, when the guys get a work order, everything's handwritten. And there's no way to crunch the data other than go through reams of paper and notebooks. And so, but they currently keep record of all the stuff that we're talking about doing. There's just no easy way to extract it. So with the new automated work order process that we're gonna be implementing with our new asset database, they'll be entering that data, and it'll already be calculating what that machine costs for that many hours that they worked on it, and all that sort of stuff. That'll all be, almost daily, you could look at that. And so we'll be able to even refine this even more in years forward.
With real data.
Right, yep. There's still gonna be some of that deciding though, like on a street sweeper type thing. There's still gonna be some of that deciding on, okay, how much percentage? But some of the stuff like the street crews will have real data from year to year, and then we can start averaging those for projections into budgets and so forth.
Did I understand, I thought I saw a reference to when the utility was first created, that there was a cartograph database at that point? Is that
We were
right?
just starting to implement that that time, and the data, and we've been using it since then, but not for work orders, just for the asset data.
Just the asset data, which includes ditches.
Right, the
And pipes.
pipelines and the inlets, manholes, that sort of stuff.
So
Yeah.
so it's really kind of the basis, it's the basis, one way to look at it, correct me if I'm misapprehending this, but it's the basis for our stormwater planning. It can provide the basis for our stormwater.
And that's
planning.
where Raftellus got the data for our current value of our system, for the impact fees. That's where that came from, is that asset data.
Jim?
Assuming that we're going to move forward, I just make for sure all new council are educated that while we're trying to appease or accommodate our residents with a minimal increase, the reality is there's a massive gorilla under the bed that's waiting for us, that if the stormwater, we obviously heard clear the other night that people, the residents want that cost shared with a larger group of people. But that would take some kind of vote. The problem is that if that doesn't happen, this group is going to have to deal with this issue again come December for 2019 budget and potentially make a very difficult decision in terms of what are we going to do with stormwater.
Right. Something has to be done, whether it's monetarily or through individual people in their homes. I've spent a lot of today doing some research, and I kind of shared with the mayor and Jim about some of the stuff that I came up with in a town called Lenexa, Kansas. They're doing what they call a green river, green streamway. It's called a central green streamway with their stormwater. And after talking with the mayor, it's kind of similar to what we have in our ditches, but it's been formed in an environmentally friendly way, green, if you will. And because they coded it that way, or they built these streamways that way, there was funding available. Is that something that we're willing to look into?
Of course, we look into any type of funding source we can find. There's almost always match dollars.
Right,
And
exactly.
they're usually also just.
And that's why
They're also project specific. You're not gonna find a grant that's gonna
Right.
fund
Well, and that's
projects
why I
from
agree
you.
with Jim, that something's got to be done. I mean, there's no sitting back and saying, oh, I don't like this idea, I don't like this
Yeah.
idea. That just is, that's not an option.
No,
We're all gonna have to give a
we
little.
create partnerships whenever we can. We're talking with the Dawson Ranch HOA right now. They're looking to partner with us on a small project up there where they're willing to pitch in some of their HOA dollars to do something. So, yeah, no, any opportunity we have to look at other funding sources, we'll do.
And then there was another community out of Oregon that was giving incentives to homeowners that would build a cistern or holding tank underneath their landscaping, so that they, it would automatically water from the bottom up. And some of that was through some funding, through some grants, and I don't know if we even qualify, but it was a incentive for homeowners to do that, to help control the stormwater, so that it wasn't going into our streets and our, you know.
Sure. I mean, We implement, and it's becoming more popular with, that's called low-impact development.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of those lid techniques that we're looking at here in Colorado. Some were restricted by water right issues in Colorado. So the cistern idea, that
Right.
sort of stuff is not something we can do yet.
But they could, citizens are each allowed to have one, is it like a barrel?
A barrel,
barrel.
yes.
One-
Yeah.
600 gallons.
Two barrels,
so
two
two
barrels.
Two rain
barrels.
barrels, right.
So what if Canyon City had everybody have 2 barrels
Yeah.
for when there were storms, and then that water would be released
Right.
slowly later?
I think it's
don't
600
know.
gallons, isn't it?
So there's some
That would even
standard.
have an impact, but I don't know, it's just some of the,
Can't even control
Crazy
the dumpsters,
ideas.
now they have to
Yeah.
control barrels.
What color would the barrels be? No,
Depending on whose house they are.
They're gonna match your
Ugly
pink tote
blue.
for your trash
gonna
can.
match the dumpsters. Go ahead, go ahead.
Ashley?
Those
Okay,
are just some ideas.
we have some public comment. But Jim,
Harry's-
go ahead.
Harry still
Oh, sorry.
wants to finish up his.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just
Okay,
want to
so-
show you, when we hire that place and they come up with these 2 options and none of that, we consider that, but I want to show you that if it is a $23.2 million project needed for next 10 years, the increase was recommended by Rapley's was about 220%. That would have been about $14.77 cost to the resident and $76.11 cost to the commercial. If we have, our needs is $75 million of capital over the 10 years. If that would have considered, we would need about 1,265% increase, which is really not need, but that would have cost resident $84.95 a month and
That's
$437.68
I go
per
out of
month on a
business.
commercial.
So the-
It's substantially high,
yeah.
which is
I
not,
know, yeah, it's not feasible whatsoever, but it does put in perspective how serious our problem
how
is.
serious are we?
I know Will needs to be leaving soon. Will, did you want to make a public comment before you?
Give him 30 seconds.
So I agree with so much of what you guys have said today, and I'm coming here wearing so many different hats, I can't even explain them all to you. Not only as a concerned citizen, but someone who sits on a ditch board, someone who owns ditch shares in 3 different ditches here in town, someone who has worked a lot to have the Whitewater Festival and build the Whitewater Park, and I also own a business here in town, which has, which we were forced to pave many years ago by the city because it was a parking lot. It was an alfalfa field that we were parking cars in, and the city forced us to pave it. I get it, it's an ordinance. Part of paving it was we had to use about 1/3 to 1/4 of that piece of property to catch our rainwater off of our parking lot. Okay, I get it. Now we're charged for our impermeable surface. Okay, well, I'm starting not to get that very much, and now you guys talk about doubling it or now maybe saving us money by cutting it back 40% or 60% or whatever number you want to throw out. As a business owner, this is starting to hurt more and more, and you're not the only place that we get bled out. Now, I understand we need to do something. As Jim said, there is a huge gorilla underneath the bed, and something needs to be done, and we finally are all starting to come to that realization that something needs to be done. But it's very unfair to just hit the people that are inside the city limits. Now, I agree, there is no way you're gonna ever get anybody to agree exactly where a line should be written into the county. We do the stormwater area and double up, on equipment. That's ridiculous, so let's not even go there. But I think it's completely unfair to completely go to the property owners of this town and keep bleeding them dry. There's got to be another way, and I brought up sales tax the other night. I know you were all here. Maybe to keep that gorilla under the bed where it belongs, maybe we should consider, go ahead and increase the stormwater with the idea that if you go for the tax, and then now changing the numbers like I just heard today, you wouldn't necessarily have to go for 1/4 to break even. You could do it with 1/8, give or take. I'm doing rough numbers. I know Harry's going, oh, not rough numbers. But you could do an 8% increase in sales tax and still come out with the 60 or 40% increase in what you guys are doing. Now, is what I'm saying is go ahead and increase your stormwater, but with the idea that when you get that quarter or 8% or whatever we need, we drop it back down and stop abusing the property owners and the business owners of this town. Because without business here, your taxes are gonna disappear because tourism is gonna quit coming here. I mean, if we keep raising, if I have to pay more to have my parking lot and I increase the price to my clients anymore, eventually they're gonna go, you know what, I can go rafting in Idaho Springs a lot more cheaply than I can here in Canyon City. And that's gonna start to happen if we keep going to the business owners over and over again. We all use the streets, we all benefit from the stormwater. Let's charge everybody, let's put a tax on it, and let's hit the out-of-state people in the county. Mr. Hamrick, you had mentioned the county gets out scot-free on it, and I kind of agree with you, but I kind of don't. If we have a tax, those people who live in the county but shop in the city are paying that. Those tourists that come from out of state and shop here are paying that. That way we diversify, it's more fair, it spreads that cost out to everybody and not just people like me.
So, answer me this, Will, because I was really involved in the street campaign to get our streets fixed, and had heard from so many that, you know, that our residents can't afford more tax on our sales tax. It's already really high, and it took us 4 times to get it passed. So what if we tried for a sales tax and based on the history of the voting record of Canyon City residents, it fails?
Very good. Is what could happen then? Now I'm gonna put on my other hat. I'm gonna go to my ditch companies, and I'm gonna say, you know what, guys? I'm in. Let's increase the shares of my ditch so we can pipe them. Now we pipe them, and I guarantee you in less than 1 summer, people will be jumping up and down to pay that 1/4% because they'll all be underwater.
Well, it'd have to be more than 1/4% at that rate.
At that point, their houses will be gone. But eventually, you know, I mean, quite honestly, you pipe one ditch going through town, your guys' job's got a lot more difficult.
Well, our job's already difficult. If we just have one terrible storm,
All right.
then City Market or Walmart are going to be flooded, and our local economy is going to be
But
completely
that
jeopardized.
1/4% or 1/8% is helping those people keep from getting flooded out, is what I'm saying. We don't have to go to that extreme. Obviously, we're using an extreme here to make my point. But if we educate the people, which I know you know what it's like to educate the people and tell them how great this tax is going to do and what it's going to do for them, they need to realize, what if they don't pay the tax? They don't vote for that tax. That water's got to go someplace. And at every ditch company meeting that I've been at in the last 3 years, those people are getting more and more hostile, and they know that this has to happen. The education has already started.
Well, and you can answer a question for me too, because I attend ditch meetings as well, and they are getting more and more hostile and upset about the stormwater issues in their ditches, but they are probably equally hostile how dare we even raise stormwater fees or increase their costs on this end to pay to fix the problem. Do you have a solution for that?
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, there's obviously going to be some people who, I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of people who are opposed to a tax no matter what it is. That's a portion of Canyon City or Fremont County. But then there's those of us who realize where the tax goes and what it does, and I think that education is starting. You know, we had to educate for the bedroom tax, the tax you don't pay. I can't get it through my mind that didn't pass, because unless you're cheating on your spouse, you're not going to pay for it. And I just don't understand how that
I know,
works.
that's what I'm saying, it's a concern.
It's a
that
concern,
very difficult
but
to get it to
the education has started, and this way you could still hit those businesses, hit those Canyon City people who don't need to be hit anymore, but have it written in there that you can repeal that $6 or whatever it's going to go up on average per household once the tax is passed. At least then there's some light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully, for us, and it forces those of us who have a lot of impervial surfaces to educate ourselves and our neighbors as to why it's good for us to pass this tax.
Would an increased sales tax affect your business and your clientele, your river rafters?
Increasing sales tax doesn't affect my clients near as much as me bumping it up because I have to pay where they park.
All right, any other questions from council?
No, I got a statement to make. I have to strongly disagree with you when you say we are abusing the citizens of Canyon City. First of all, this came about from the federal government, okay? Mandating certain things that we had to do or pay a heavy fine. Because I was on council back then when we got there. We did what we could just to satisfy the federal government. Because they never put money down when they send things out to do. And we've done everything to try to keep it as low as we can. But now we're up against a brick wall. We've asked these folks numerous times to go back and rework everything so we can come up with something that's feasible. And this is what they've come up with, okay? This right now is the best solution we have to take care of our residents, take care of our needs with regards to stormwater and everything else. So we haven't been abusing anybody. And if we don't do something now, then guess what? Down the roadway, it'll come to that point. We're trying to do this in steps that benefits everybody. So we're not abusing the residents of Canyon City. We're not abusing anybody. We're utilizing every effort we can to make this work in the best interest of everybody.
And all I'm asking is that you look at the ability to, if a
And
tax.
sales tax isn't going to work. To me, that's abusing the residents.
That's borderline abuse right there.
Well, I would, if you feel inclined, the Stormwater Task Force is looking for citizens to join the task force to give their view for a more regional solution.
Sure.
If you're interested in adding a hat, we can put your name in there to be a part of finding solutions.
I'd be more than happy to do that.
All right.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you.
Well, before
Yes.
you leave, if you go back a couple of years ago at the failing of the first street tax, we challenged some citizens that came up, such as you did, or are, with the fact that if you believe you can educate and promote a street tax that's going to pass, we'll do everything we can to support you. And there was a group of residents that got together and formed that 2A committee. And that's essentially what they did, is they educated the public in terms of what needed to happen, and they passed that tax. That tax was not passed by this council. It was passed because of that 2A committee and those people putting the boots on the ground and fixing the problem. So if that tax you or your group believe is a viable option, you need to get out there and work it and promote it and see if you can't come up with the supporting numbers that you're going to need.
It won't be a viable option if we already have, if we increase it 40 or 60% the stormwater fee, and I go out and say, okay, I take your challenge, I say, okay, I can go out and get this 8% or 1/4% or whatever we decide it is, but if we already have the city is already funding that money through the stormwater, it's very hard for me to say, well, we want more money. It's a lot easier for me to say, the city wants more money, but they'll cut back your stormwater fee if this tax passes.
We did the same thing relative to the roughly $400,000 in current budget for street improvement. We committed to that group to the best that we could, that even if 2A passes, that $400 allocation would continue to be a budget item whenever possible. And that was essentially a critical element in that 2A plan, was that the city would continue to fund normal street maintenance. And I don't see a problem with us making a commitment with a viable tax option, if it's going to work, that, you know, if the tax passes, then it would only make sense for the city to then go back and reduce any other fees accordingly. But again, we need a group, if the tax option is a viable option, to get that whole process going.
And that's what I'm asking. That's exactly where I started with this, is I understand that you have to do something now. You can't wait to find out that the tax doesn't pass. I agree with you. But if you have the ability to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and increase the fee, but if we can raise the tax, the sales tax, whatever percent to do that, we're willing to pull that back.
Well, get a formidable group together that's supporting the tax and bring it to council and then see what council's flavor is.
Okay, very good.
Thanks for coming with solutions and ideas.
Thank you.
I have one quick comment.
Yes.
Is it possible, relative to we keep hearing about this issue with commercials, which makes sense, where we have a requirement for the paving of the lot, and then we come around and then have an impervious fee? Is it possible for commercials that have those, I think there's two types of reservoirs that you mentioned, that one that stores it and one that just holds it? That we could have a commercial credit for those entities that have those things? For example, let's take Walmart. Let's say Walmart's charge was $500, but because they're storing 98% of their stormwater, there could be some kind of credit for those commercial entities that are not having stormwater runoff. Is that possible and legal?
You still have pollution issues.
What?
You still have pollution issues.
Well, not if if they don't have any stormwater runoff.
Yes, the short answer is yes.
What's the long answer?
Well, you got to shift that cost to somebody.
What cost?
Well, if you're going to give them a credit, that's a deficit then in the budget.
And
Well,
somebody
I'm
else
going to
has
say a
make up for
credit,
it.
I'm going to say a credit relative to their charge, what their charge would be.
Right, so you have to make up that difference somewhere else.
I think
You
it's
know,
a valid concern, but
in-
just to
in-
put it in perspective, the average business with this proposed fee that we're talking about, with 19,000 square feet of impervious surface, that's the average for a business, is 50 cents a month.
Per square foot.
No.
That
Their
can't be right.
additional increase.
Well,
Here,
that doesn't make sense. And I'm saying just relative to the figures that some of the people were talking about a couple of weeks ago. For example, the lender situation, didn't he tell us $1,500 or something?
Harry has it right here.
here, if we are proposing that we should have 40% increase without capital.
Right.
If we do that, the residents will have $2.68 increase per month based on 3688 square foot. That is average.
Right.
And for commercial, average is 19,000 square foot, and their bill will be $13.83 greater than what the current bill is.
Okay.
Well, and I think we'll,
It's 50 cents a day.
Yeah.
Greg, you
Well,
have a comment?
what I was gonna say before Mr. Cullen left is, in fairness to the small business industry, I have to share some sympathy with him in that this is one of the reasons I always preach that you gotta find some middle ground. So they put in a parking lot, so we insisted that they had to pave it. So then they paved it, so then we insisted they had to catch their water, so then there was an additional expense. Now, for a small business on a parking lot, you don't recoup that expense the same way you do for extra shelving or table space. Now, it's more probably, I'm sure, the principle, because Mr. Cullen and they run a very successful business, and I'm sure it's probably more principle than anything else, but it's the principle that they had their hand forced on these two issues, and now they're being penalized again for this issue, and I've had the very same thing happen, so I share his frustrations. And I think that's why it's so important to work with people rather than command and tell people. And we have to be very careful when we're doing things in any of our stewards of position, that we are working in a workable manner and not in a commanding manner.
I don't want to be backpedaling, but Adam, can you explain why it's important for businesses to have parking lots?
Well, sure, it's not a penalty. If we didn't, well, the deckless and durable standard in the zoning code for paving parking lots, first of all, they have the option to do an alternate paving where they can do pervious paving, where they're not dinged for that monthly fee.
And some businesses have chosen to do that.
And there are some businesses that have done that. Second of all, as far as the detention, if we didn't require the detention, the penalty would be their neighbors, because they're increasing the runoff. So they're mitigating their impact.
Well,
So, so they're wanting to build something, and because of what they're wanting to build, they have to detain the increased flows. So to have them not do it would be a penalty to everyone else in the city, not them.
I understand that, and I'm speaking semantically in this specific incident. I can tell you as a small business owner, every time you turn around, there's a new entity and there's a new cost of doing business, and not every one of those costs is easily displaced to the customer. So I'm sure that everybody's heart is in the same place. The council wants to solve this problem. Small business owners want to continue to run businesses and contribute sales tax and keep our city moving and rolling. And you guys are trying to make sure that we're complying. Everybody's trying to move in the same direction. We've just got to find a way to get on the same page with each other. And we've got to do it in a team manner and in a respectful manner, not in a barking manner.
Well, and I think to Will's credit, he said he realized that if we do have to keep in the black in this, but we need to also keep the conversation on a regional approach and finding an
Absolutely.
alternative source of income or a regional source of income that can be beneficial to all, so there isn't over some burden, including small businesses.
And I think one thing we need to understand too, when we require, whether it's a business owner or whether it's a household person, when we require them to do certain things, there's a purpose behind it. It's not just the fact that we want to do it, okay? We look at it, how we can do it, why we have to do it, and if there's any way, when we're getting ready to do it, is there any way we can help adjust it? That's the way the process goes, because there's not going to be one thing that's going to be perfect for everybody, but we're forced to do certain things by our regulations that we have adopted in this town with other city councils. So that's what we're looking at here. And I understand the business with, if someone goes and lays their whole driveway in cement, he's going to pay a big price, okay? But he's paying that big price because we are forced to make him pay that price by the federal government. So we need to look at everything when we say what we're doing to this and that. We went out, I don't know how many times, asking for the contractors and everybody else to give us solutions for problems. No one's coming forward, So they're also part of the problem. If there's a problem, let them come forward too and start working to solve it. We can't do it all, okay? But we listen. That's why we're at the point we are now, because we've listened. And we're looking at the best solution we can have for the residents of Kansas City and the business owners, everybody. And so we need to look at stuff like that. And that's our job as members of city council, to look at the totality of what we do.
So let's see if we can wrap.
I still got a
That's it.
question.
Okay.
And I appreciate your time, but somebody needs to explain this to me. I have a 5,000-foot parking lot that's completely paved. And good old Greg over there has, Councilman Dorito, has a 5,000-foot parking lot and a collection reservoir, or whatever you're going to call it, where he has absolutely no runoff. I cannot comprehend why him and I both pay the same stormwater fee.
Two reasons. It's not true that he has absolutely no runoff. There is a storm event where there is runoff.
Okay.
Okay? So the other reason you're paying the same fee is because we're all paying for all the common elements within the city. The streets, the benefit that City Market, where Greg shops and you shop both, doesn't flood. So the greater benefit, kind of like the school district thing, we're all benefiting from educated children, we think. So it's that concept. Now there are some cities that give credits, and I'm not saying that that's not a bad idea. I'm just saying we would have to adjust the budget and the fees to everyone else if we want to do that.
Philosophically, what you're talking about with stormwater fees makes sense, but the practicality of stormwater is I'm contributing to the stormwater physical problem, and he's not.
But you're right, and that's a common misnomer with this whole concept of why how and why we charge fees, okay? So it's not a drop for drop charge. It's not about how much water falls on your property versus how much runs off at the street, or I own a hayfield, no water leaves my hayfield kind of story, okay? You have to be able to bill on something that has some nexus. And the nexus is impervious surface contributes to greater amount of runoff and pollutants. That's a fact. It's been proven in court. It's been tested in court. So that's why we use that mechanism, okay? It was never intended to be, well, I only have 2 gallons that leave my property and he's got 30 gallons, so he needs to pay more.
Apparently, we can't change that methodology or calculation legally,
Well,
because it leads to
You-
these conversations.
you could, but the calculations and the charging it would be insane. You'd be spending more money going through that process than using the most basic court-tested process.
But then that would also up the cost for the person who has more water leaving than the person who doesn't have more water leaving, right?
Right.
So your costs
Isn't
would
that-
go up and his cost would go down. So,
Well, and understand, Adam, I've reviewed the documents as much as I can in the short time I've been here, and I believe we have a problem, and I believe that the 40% is a Band-Aid. It's putting a you know, a Band-Aid on a broken arm. I feel like we have a bigger problem than even the 40% is acknowledging. I'm just expressing empathy for I understand where Mr. Cullen and other, you know, people in that position are coming from. And that's why I express that it's so important about the mannerism in which we achieve our goal as opposed to just getting the goal.
Well, and I think, Councilman Dorito, that we do have empathy for our folks. None of us want to raise these fees. This is a very difficult thing. But we also have a responsibility to the public as a whole and to keeping our budget in the black and avoiding lawsuits and trouble with the EPA.
Yeah, Greg, and you weren't part of some of the initial discussions we had earlier, or late last year and earlier this year, but again, the question is always about how are you gonna pay for it? There's a, you know, Mr. Cullen brought that up, there's a number of ways you can do it. I'm hoping, but I feel like we've kind of discussed the best and tested methods, which is why we're still where we're at with the stormwater fee. We've talked before in the past about like a grant or scholarship type program where we can help encourage reducing impervious surface. We did have a change in 2008, I think, where we have a special condition for someone who is disabled and has to add additional impervious surface around their house above and beyond what maybe some of us do. They get a discount based on that. So we can create other programs like that that help encourage and or discourage impacts to the facilities and the stormwater. But the costs still have to be shifted somehow. And you have to have a formula to back that up.
Absolutely, and I understand budgets, and I understand at the end of the day, you gotta pay the bills. You gotta pay the tax man first, you gotta make sure the bills are paid if you wanna keep the roof over your head. I understand that concept, I'm not disputing that.
So let's move forward, if we can. Is council feeling comfortable with the 40% increase? So yes from Jim, yes from John,
Yes.
Mayor Greg?
Yes.
Yes.
Bring you an ordinance for the next meeting.
Yeah, it'll be an amended second reading.
I got you.
So we're gonna move forward, there'll be an amended second reading, and will that be at the March 19th? Okay. So
Any
for the,
added verbiage? No added language?
We might try something.
don't ever even think about that. So we're gonna bring that to the second reading. Just for the record, I will not be here at that meeting, so.
Oh, sure,
all
I'm
know
gonna
my-
be here.
my feelings.
When is that? When is it?
Spring break weekends. 2.
No, it's-
When will you be bringing to the general government?
No, to the next city council.
Next city council, yeah. March 19th.
Okay, I'll be here.
Okay, well, thank you to our staff.
Thanks.
Thank you to our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you,
to
guys.
the council members. and-
Thanks, guys. Off the
No.
record.
Off the record.
You're
No,
still on, I
it's on
haven't
the
hit the
record.
gavel yet. You're on the record. Okay, I'd like to ask. You need to go to the microphone.
Hey, while he's going up, Greg, your responsibility on this council, one of them is to make sure we maintain that compassion. When we get out of it, you need to let us know. I'm serious.
I will do my very best.
Doug Cohen, citizen and president of Oil Creek Ditch. I'd like to answer Preston's question as to what's considered a storm. I just know from where we're coming from, when I took over the ditch as an officer in the ditch, a 2 to a 2.5 inch storm, we still didn't have to close our ditch down to accommodate your storm water. But today, it's anywhere from a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch. So that's how much more stormwater is running off the city streets and the county. Now I'd like to ask a question. If I want to build a house, or if I want to do anything, I have to meet the regulations of the city, correct?
Theoretically.
Yes,
Pretty
but
much.
some of it's mandated from the
Okay.
federal government and state.
Now, why wouldn't the city have to meet state law? State law reads, ditch owners are not required under the law to accept stormwater runoff that a result of development that occurs after the ditch was constructed. The ditch owner would have a legal claim based on trespass, as well as claim based upon the fact that the ditch is not a natural drainage, and most likely the increased flows will be deposited into the ditch in a manner or quantity to do more harm than formerly. You don't have to answer that, just think about it. Thank you.
Thank you,
you,
Mr.
Doug.
Cohen.
And I think on a final note, I just want to give a thank you and a gratitude to our finance department and to those wonderful compliments that were given to you both, and John in particular,
Good
for your
job.
record keeping. That was granted by that independent study, and we really appreciate that and gives us a lot of we've always had confidence in your department, and that's just verified. So thank you for your
We
work.
think to earn additional revenue for the city, we're gonna rent them out. Is that-
Uh,
I want to make one more. I want to make one final comment. The 40% increase what we come up with based on effective date May 1st.
So April,
April, yeah. We thought that we might have another process, we might have a ordinance has to pass in the 2 sessions. So we calculated based on May 1st. So you might want to change if you would like to. Otherwise, if you keep it same way, it won't make too much difference. It's about $20,000 difference.
Can we're not going to have another meeting for April, right?
they're going to adopt it on the 19th.
So what he's saying is if you make it effective April 1st, which was the plan,
Then
you'll collect another 20 grand.
20,000 more.
I mean, that's where we originally planned. I mean, the May was just because we
I
kept
just want to
postponing
make
it.
sure. It's not significant dollar amount, but that's how we calculate.
It's a
Thank
dollar.
you. All right.
Carrie, I'll see, because if they amend it on second reading, it's got to get published again, and then we'll figure out the effective date.
Significant to me.
Meeting's adjourned.
Hey,